Hey guys, how's it going? This is Zeb from Zed Outdoors. I hope you're having an awesome day. So today I'm here to see Nick McMillen, who's a full-time professional craftsman and artist based in his workshop here in the county of Hampshire, which is in the south coast of England. He actually shares his workshop with his wife, who's also a professional full-time craftswoman. And one of Nick's specialities is basketry, and more specifically cedar bark basketry. Now what this video is kicking off a mini 3-part series in which we're going to be looking at 3 different aspects and phases of making cedar bark baskets. Now in this first video we're going to be looking at all the processes and nuances involved in actually harvesting cedar bark. In the second video we're going to be looking at how to actually process that bark ready for basketry, and in the final video we're going to be looking at the actual entire process for weaving an actual cedar bark basket. Now, would I be right in saying cedar bark basketry is actually one of your specialities?
Yeah, I've been weaving cedar bark since about 2006.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
And would I be right in saying you've actually won some awards for your basket?
Yeah, I came second in the Basket of the Year award last year. So going to try and improve on that next year.
That's a big deal because the competition is really stiff.
Yeah, we got invited up to Mansion House in London for a big banquet with the Worshipful Company of Basket Makers, which was pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah. Nick's work is amazing. We're going to have a bit of a close-up look later on in the video. The one thing, 2 things actually I want to kind of stress before we begin with the rest of this video is what Nick has done is he's actually only just released and published a very comprehensive ebook which goes into an incredible amount of detail, everything we're going to be talking about in these videos, and also a lot more, along with a lot of beautiful illustrations that you've done yourself. Because he's also a professional illustrator. So a link to that will be down below in the description and also pinned to the top of the comments. I would highly recommend, if you get any value whatsoever from these videos, then you can support Nick's work by getting yourself a copy of that ebook. And like I said, that goes into a lot of detail, everything we're going to be talking about, and a lot more. The second thing I will be doing, needless to say, I will also be putting links down below to Nick's social media and also his website. Highly encourage you to follow his work there. He posts a lot of updates in terms of what he's getting up to on a day-to-day basis, and you can see a lot of things up close and personal. So like I said, in this video we're going to kick things off by looking at the actual harvesting of the cedar bark. So Nick, with your kind permission, shall we begin?
Yeah, let's do it.
So guys, I hope you enjoy the rest of this video where Nick McMillen is going to be teaching you how to harvest cedar bark for basketry. So Nick, the first question I have for you is that, do you work with a particular type of cedar?
Yeah, so the cedar we're going to be using for our basketry project, and what I predominantly use, is Western red cedar. Thuja plicata is the Latin name. It's native to the northwest coast of Canada and America, where it grows to enormous sizes. It's like a temperate rainforest there. They get a huge amount of rain each year. And these trees go massive. In the UK, which is where I'm based, it's grown as a timber crop in sort of tightly densed plantations. So it's a very sort of very different environment. The trees are sort of planted very close together, forces them up straight and all that sort of stuff. So that kind of affects how we have access to the tree, and also how we're able to harvest the bark.
So in terms of the location of a tree, okay, so are there things to kind of bear in mind in terms of the permission, the land it's taken from, etc.?
Yeah, so certainly in England, the tree is only grown on usually estates. They will be owned by someone. Certainly the land will be owned by someone, so they're going to own the trees. So yeah, you need the permission of the landowner. We found ourselves, these people are usually quite approachable. If you ask them permission and tell them what you want, at worst they'll be happy to sell you a tree. Sometimes, you know, as part of management plans, we've been able to just harvest trees on a sort of, you know, 2 or 3 a year over a period of time to help the landowner with their management of their woodland. Especially nowadays, these plantations, they're not very biodiverse. The trees are planted close together, there's not much grows underneath them. So they're pretty sort of like monocultures basically. But now landowners are being encouraged to revert their woodlands back to native species. So when these plantations are felled, they're allowed to only replant with native species. So landowners have been very good with us, just, you know, taking the odd tree here and there and then allowing sort of natural regeneration of native woodland to come back through.
So Nick, is there an optimal time of year to be harvesting cedar bark?
Yeah, so as with all tree barks, you want to be harvesting them kind of springtime, early summer, when the sap's rising in the tree. What this means is that the bark actually peels away from the wood of the tree really easily. If you try this sort of stuff during the winter or kind of late summer onwards, you'll find that the bark's almost kind of part of the tree, you know, it's welded to the wood and it won't peel away cleanly. But at this time of year, when the sap's rising, you know, it's almost like they're two very distinct layers and they peel away very easily, and you'll actually feel the sap between the inner bark and the wood. Now certainly with cedar, there is a kind of golden 2-week period that we've sort of, well, I heard about on through some social media from Canada, and it's basically cedar bark's really sticky. If you get it at the wrong time, you're going to be really sticky, and it's a nightmare to get off your hands. It's, yeah, quite full on. The bark's still usable, you know, you can still weave with it, it's just a bit of a faff to handle. But there is this golden 2-week period, and we found in the UK certainly, it's sort of right at the very end of April and the beginning of May. So those kind of 2 weeks there. And at that time, it's like the sap's running like a water, so it's not sticky at all. And it just makes sort of processing and handling the bark that much easier. So if you can get that sort of golden 2-week period, that's perfect.
So in terms of the diameter of cedar wood itself, is there a kind of an ideal size, diameter, etc.?
So I guess that sort of depends on, you know, what sort of access you've got to what sort of trees really. Obviously, you know, the bigger the tree, it's going to have thicker bark. So if you go for a tree, say this kind of size, you know, the bark's going to be quite thin. If you go for a tree that kind of size, the bark could be, you know, up to kind of 1/4 inch thick. But, you know, big trees, that's a lot of timber to handle. You know, if you come across one that's fallen and you're able to harvest it, then, you know, brilliant, you're going to get a lot of material off that. For our sakes, we actually sort of buy a tree from the landowner and we'll fell the tree. So we try to, you know, go for the smaller end of the scale just because they're easier to handle.
So before getting into the actual harvesting of the cedar bark, would I be right in saying there are approximately 3 conditions you will find a tree in for harvesting?
Yeah, so yeah, it's broadly speaking true. You know, you're gonna have your tree standing and alive, okay, which is what most of the trees in here are, still alive. They've had their sort of second thinning, I think, from the woodland management. Then you're going to come across something like this here. So we've got a toothpick, which is basically a storm damaged tree. We had quite a major storm in the UK here in the south over the winter, and it damaged a load of trees in this woodland. So this is another, you know, this sort of standing toothpick, which is of no use to the landowner at all really. It's kind of wood chip really. Then we're going to have, you know, the top of the tree here, which is lying on the ground. So you know, this is all usable material. Although this sort of snapped during the winter, we've done a few sort of test peels and we're still able to get the bark off it. So, you know, this is a very good way of being able to get your bark. You know, you speak to a landowner and say, you know, I'm just after a little bit or whatever, and you know, if they've got storm damaged trees, they're probably more than happy for you to you know, peel them. When it comes to peeling from live trees, certainly in the UK, it's very, very different across the pond in the States and Canada. Very different sort of, you know, ethos and way of doing this. But in the UK, if you start peeling off a live tree, you know, you're going to damage that tree for what the landowner wants it for. So he's going to want it for timber, ideally in its best prime state. If you peel a strip off it, that's going to damage that the tree for that. So he or they aren't going to be really happy with you. So you really shouldn't start peeling from live trees in the UK unless you've got the landowner's permission. If they're happy for you to do it, then, you know, go for it. But what I tend to do is my third option. So I'll buy a whole tree off the landowner, I'll fell it as part of their broader sort of woodland management plan, and then that gives me access to the entire tree, and I can peel the bark off the entire tree. And I use the bark from right at the butt all the way up to the tip, even between all the branch unions, which we'll get on later. You can use all that for different things. And then I use the timber for, you know, I might make some bentwood boxes out of the timber, or just firewood it, or, you know, make some shingles or something like that for projects at home. So they're your kind of three states that you're going to find your timber in.
So with the actual harvesting of the bark, Nick, where would you like to begin?
So we'll start by taking a strip off this sort of snap top from our toothpick here, and I'll just show you, you know, how the bark peels from this. You know, this has been snapped since the winter. There's still quite a lot of moisture in there, so hopefully we're going to get this bark off quite easily. Because this part of the tree is from the top, we're starting to get into where all our branch unions are. You can see these here and here. So that obviously limits you on these long strips of bark that we'll get later on. But you can still get, you know, a good section of bark off here in between these branch unions. So I'll just use the axe. I'm just going to start cutting in here. And I'm just trying to get right through the bark to the wood. Just sort of get in there. I might batten it actually, it might be easier. That's good. You can see I'm able to get my fingers in there quite nicely. Let's take that strip off. I've just carved a very rough sort of thing here. It's not the best axe work I've ever done. But yeah, it's just something we call a spud. And it's just very good for getting in to the bark like so. Because it can be quite tight in there and you can get your fingers in, it can be quite sore. So I'm just going to do a little stop cut up here as well with the axe.
So in order to get a clean stroke, you're cutting before the branch?
Yeah, so when I come up to this branch union, you can see the way, you know, the grain of the wood's going around where the branches come out. It's also true of the bark. So the bark will have, you know, it'll twist and turn around that area. They can just be problem areas when you're processing later on and cutting nice even sort of strips. So I tend to just sort of, you know, cut them out straight from the start. It just makes things easier. Okay, that's good. And then we can just peel this away. I'm just going to cut that down a bit further down. And it's important to make sure you're going right to the wood when you're batting it with the axe. And just a little bit more up there.
In terms of the length of strip that you're doing, will that dictate what you're then able to weave it with later on?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, obviously the longer the strip, you know, you can make bigger baskets with it. Saying that, you can kind of add in. So, you know, if you want to, I've woven some, you know, big mats, kind of a metre, bigger than a metre square. It's very difficult to get all that material at that length, so quite often, you know, you're adding new weavers in. So you know, don't think that if you're only getting short bits you can only make small baskets. You can always make them bigger if you want. But that's quite a nice, you know, that's a good bit of bark, that. You know, it's a good length. You know, something like that will make a basket kind of that sort of size, so, you know, very usable, absolutely. So yeah, it's a good way of being able to get hold of your bark from these sort of storm damaged trees. Landowner's not going to mind as long as you get their permission. And yeah, everyone's a winner.
So Nick, you're going to show a different technique for harvesting the cedar bark.
Yeah, so I'll show you now the traditional method that's used in the northwest coast Canada and America. Over there, you know, their trees are growing big. They're on sort of in these huge temperate rainforests, and their idea is, you know, you take a little bit from each tree, and you're not killing the tree. Just by taking one strip of bark from up a tree, you know, and then leaving that tree, the tree will just heal over and it will grow and it will carry on, which is, you know, ideal. In a perfect world, that's what we should all be doing. Here in the UK, as I explained earlier, you know, landowners are going to be really unhappy if you start stripping bark off their trees. It's going to ruin their timber. Okay. But, you know, if you get this sort of toothpick here, it's a good opportunity to kind of practice these traditional methods and, you know, at least have a good understanding of, you know, how it was done, and also an understanding of why it was done this way. So what we're going to do, I'll just start, got my knife, I'm just going to make a kind of a stop cut down here. And again, I've just looked at the tree, tried to find a nice clear run of bark up the tree, no branch unions and stuff like that. So I put a stop cut in, then I'm going to put a couple of side grooves. These are just going to help the split start either side there. I can see already it's going to run off that way, innit? And you want to make sure again that you're going nice and deep, getting right through that bark. So on a tree this size, you know, the bark's going to be a 1/4 inch thick. Then very carefully with your knife, start peeling that bark away. Just mind your fingers. Again, it's always worth, you know, have a first aid kit with you when you're doing this sort of stuff. And just take your time here. Don't worry too much if it starts splitting a bit. This sort of end's going to be a bit damaged anyway. So you can see there we're starting to peel it away from the wood. That's good. Just going to batten it a bit more there. Right, we should be able to grab hold of this now. So just get your fingers in. Always a fighter. There we go. You can see how thick that bark is. That's really thick, that stuff. Really different. Right. And then we're just going to slowly guide that split. I'm in the States, in Canada, they've got massive trees. They can get a good sort of 20, 30, 40 foot run on this. But here, I'm not doing so well. But it sort of shows you you can appreciate the skill these harvesters used to have. That's pretty dismal, but you know, we've got a usable bit of bark there. But you know, if you knew what you were doing properly, you could probably get a strip all the way up this tree.
So Nick, we're now going to look into your personal method for harvesting the bark. Would you like to talk us through how you do it?
Yeah, so what we've got here is a tree that we felled yesterday. It's quite a small diameter tree. You know, you can see this is sort of near the butt end. It's not that big at all. Again, it just means it's less work for us to sort of handle, and you know, less timber for us to deal with. Also the cost. Since, you know, a few years ago, big political changes, price of timber's absolutely skyrocketed. So, you know, we're buying this tree off the landowner. You know, we buy a bigger tree that we were peeling from earlier, you know, that's double the price. So we've just gone for a smaller one this year for those reasons. Once I've felled the tree, you know, and I've had, you know, all the permission from the landowner to do that, he's very happy with us. I felled the tree, and then I used the chainsaw to just cut these grooves, which you can see certainly on the stuff that's already peeled. And that is going to allow me to just pull off long strips of bark nice and easily. Okay, you can use a knife, you can use an axe, just takes a long time. And as you saw with the standing tree when I was peeling there, the bark sort of peels off very easily. You know, it'll sort of peel to a tapered point, and you're kind of wasting bark. When I've bought the whole tree, I want to maximise, you know, the bark I'm using here. So yeah, I cut these long strips. I also keep them quite narrow, which will become more apparent in the next stage of harvesting. So I don't want these, you know, too wide, sorry. I want them quite narrow, about a hand span is adequate, and that's just going to help us when we come to actually peeling the bark in a minute. So what I'll do is, now that the bark's been cut into strips, I've just sort of got my fingers in there and I've just peeled off that end. Okay, you can see the wood there.
So you're sliding your hands underneath just to guide it through, yeah?
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure there's no bits of bark being left behind. You know, certainly round knots and stuff can be a bit of a problem. You can see here it's quite wet under there. You know, there's quite a lot of moisture in there. And as we go up this one, I think we've got a slight sort of weirdness going on with this tree. You can see there, we just come to this sort of almost like a dead bit, where the bark's operating very differently. But that's fine, I can just cut that off. You know, we've got a nice long strip of bark there. That's how we tend to process all our bark these days. You know, we'll fell the whole tree, we'll do these grooves, and we'll split all this bark all the way up.
So your goal essentially is to maximise the amount of bark you can harvest by using this particular technique?
Yeah. You know, we've got another section there that we'll do. This is the third run. And then the top section, which is up there, which is where all the branch unions start. You don't get the long runs, but you can get the sort of more sort of square, rectangular sheets of bark almost. And they're ideal for folded basketry. So, you know, even right up the top where the branch unions are that far apart, you can cut that little square out, you can make a tiny little basket, which I, you know, sell at Christmas and stuff. So, you know, it's usable all the way up, and, you know, we felled the tree, we want to make sure we use the whole thing.
And just to wrap up on this kind of final technique, you were saying with the remaining wood kind of left over that you utilise that as well.
Yeah, I mean, some of it, you can see these rings down there, they've got butt rot, so they've got these holes in. You can use those for sort of planters. That's what we've sort of planted herbs and stuff in them before. This smaller stuff, I just ring it for firewood. But some of this stuff here, I've left a couple of sections here, which I'm going to cut into planks. I'm going to clean those up. I've just sort of roughed them in half with a chainsaw, but I'll clean those up and can make some bent wood boxes with them, which is quite a fun little project to do. So yeah, it's all still usable. It's good stuff.
So Nick, what's the next part of the process now that you've kind of peeled it off the actual tree itself?
Okay, so we've got this material off the tree. Yeah, it's got two very distinct sides, as you can see here. We've got this lovely inner bark here, this real nice golden colour. And then we turn it over and we've got the rough outer bark. If we want to process this material to be in a state to weave with, we need to get rid of this outer bark. If we leave the outer bark on, as it all dries, the outer bark will actually just sort of stick to the inner bark. And once this is all fully dried, you know, it's kind of useless for weaving with. You know, you're not going to get that outer bark off anymore. So it's really a job that has to be done straight away while the bark's still wet. Okay, there's a couple of ways of doing it. I'll show you one way. So basically, got the outer bark on the outside, okay, facing up. And I'm going to bend it in half, and you can see there how the outer bark's split. And then I'm just going to encourage that split, and I'm going to really force, I'm going to stand up here, really force this side down, and I want to reveal that pink layer. See it coming through there? And that's the bit I want. Now I'm just going to follow that split all the way down. Now if anyone's split wood before, this is your universal splitting techniques of, you know, keeping that split running where you want it. And if it starts running off, it's always going to run off to the weaker side, the thinner side. So we want to pull on the thicker side. And this is the thicker side. So I'm giving this more work, but every now and again just letting that, you can see there it's peeled back in. So pull that down, shears off. And I'm clamping the bark between my knees just to apply a bit of tension there. And you can, you know, get quite quick in the end. We get down to there. So we get this sort of material, yeah? That's where we want to be. Another way to start this is to actually use your knife to score across there. Maybe if the bark's quite thick or, you know, it's not behaving very well. Just use a knife, just bed it in until you start hitting the inner bark, and then again just bend it open, and the split will start at that point. So let's have a go down here. Again, I want to get deeper than that, so I'm going to really force on this side. You can start seeing the inner bark coming through. Really cranking this side over. That's good for where we want to be, so I can start. Let's get that bit over. Come on, you. There we go. This takes, you know, a bit of practice, but it's quite pleasing once you get it. As I was saying earlier, you know, we've got a little tree here. It's not very wide. It's probably 12-inch diameter. So our bark's actually quite thin. The tree we were looking at earlier, that standing broken tree, the bark was probably twice as thick as this. So we're here up at that weird dried bit that we had. So yeah, I'll probably leave that there. So that's our strip of processed bark. This bit here, I'm just going to go in with a knife and just gently kind of peel that all away, just so I'm down to the same spot. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll this up. Like so. And I'm going to leave that to dry fully, okay? It's really important this. If you make a basket with this material as it is, it's going to shrink loads, and when the bark shrinks, it's going to make your basket all loose and baggy. We don't want that, okay? So it's going to shrink the most the first time you dry it. So probably take 2 or 3 days if it's quite hot weather. We've found as well, don't leave it outside on the grass because it will get mouldy. Bring it indoors, and just let it dry until it's gone absolutely rock hard and rigid. And then we'll talk about how we take it a little bit further in a minute.
So Nick, before we wrap up this particular installment, one final question I have for you. So once you have the bark in a coil, like you just showed a moment ago, how long would you actually typically leave that for to fully dry?
So it's going to depend on the temperature where you're at, but it's going to take 3-4 days, and it's really important to kind of dry it fully. It's got to be absolutely rock hard, bone dry. Okay. Traditionally, the bark was left to season for a year, so they were always using last year's harvest to weave with, which is something I do now because I harvest regularly. So I will use last year's bark to weave with. But as far as I'm concerned, really, as long as it's dry, bone dry, it's dry, and it's good to go. You can move on to the next stage.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, like we mentioned at the very beginning, this is part one of a 3-part series on cedar basketry. So like we've just shown throughout this entire video, this is Nick's process for actually harvesting the cedar bark. In a second video, we're going to actually be looking at in detail the processing, the entire process that Nick goes through to have the bark ready for weaving, in which we're going to look at in the final third video. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the next part of the process myself.
Yeah, it's going to be cool.
And the final reminder of 2 things. Number 1, like I mentioned, Nick has done an accompanying ebook, which is very detailed. He's done all the custom illustrations himself, and that goes into this entire process of cedar basketry and in a lot more detail. If you wish to kind of secure yourself a copy and support Nick's work in the process, there will be a link to that in the description and pinned to the top of the comments. And finally, the second thing is a link to Nick's social media and website, and it will mean the world to me if you got any value from this video whatsoever to go and check him out on social media, in particular Instagram, and to give him a follow, show him some support in terms of the work that he's doing. I follow him myself and I love seeing what he gets up to. He's a very talented guy in terms of basketry, crafts in general, and also illustrations. So like I said, a link to his ebook and a link to his social media and website in the description below and pinned to the top of the comments. So Nick, I really do appreciate you sharing this process.
It's been a pleasure.
Guys, look forward to seeing you in the next installment. Links to the next 2 videos in the description below and also pinned to the top of the comments. So as always, I hope whatever you're doing, you have a blessed day, a blessed week ahead. From myself, Zed Outdoors, and Nick McMillen, peace out.
Cheers.